From a small spark kindled in America, a flame has arisen, not to be extinguished.
We think about independence movements of the 20th century. You don't always recognize the fact that the United States actually started that.
The American Revolutionary Movement served as a model for freedom from oppression.
America is predicated on an idea that tells us who we are, where we came from, and what our forebears were willing to die for.
Collins said no taxation without representation. The fear was, if we give in to this precedent, what will they do in the future?
Crisis changes people. It gave different people different ideas about what they should be doing.
It gave them a space to make this democracy real.
The founders thought we can start over again. We can begin the world anew.
The British objective is to suppress the rebellion, force them to acknowledge the authority of the king.
Washington understands the war he's fighting. He doesn't have to win. He only has not to lose.
He becomes quite eloquent in trying to persuade people we're all Americans.
We see regiments with individuals who are not carrying arms, doing essential labor, including women.
They are at the forefront of this movement.
One of the most remarkable aspects is that you had such different places come together as one nation.
It mushrooms into a global campaign that touches Europe and all parts of the world.
It so excites us that we are the product of a revolutionary moment where the world turned upside down.
To believe in America is to believe in possibility.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Real History. I'm your host, History Professor Jared Frederick, and in this special episode, I have two very unique guests who are going to be sharing some insights about their forthcoming film, The American Revolution. And that is Sarah Botstein and David Schmidt, longtime collaborators with documentarian Ken Burns. Thank you both so much for joining us here on Real History.
Thank you, Jared.
Thanks for having us.
So to start off, to get a little bit of background on some of your personal exploits and experiences, what was the movie or documentary or show or experience that inspired you both to become filmmakers?
I don't actually have a film that inspired me or a documentary to become a filmmaker. I was an American Studies major in college and very interested in the intersection of history, culture, art, photography, film. So I really come at this from a sort of cultural history as a conversation, how history intersects with everything else in our world, and was lucky enough when I was thinking about going to graduate school to get a job working for Ken on a big series we did in 2001 about the history of jazz music, which I knew virtually nothing about. So I got to dive into the documentary music, photographic 20th century universe on a subject I knew very little about and got hooked.
And I've always been a huge history buff. I grew up in Virginia, worked in colonial Williamsburg, had a summer as an archaeologist at Jamestown. Yorktown wasn't too far away. But if I had to pick a film, this is going to be a self-serving answer maybe, but it was Ken Burns' Civil War. I was so in love with that program. And then when I was in college, I was a history major, and we watched the Civil War in one class, we watched jazz in another class, Lewis and Clark in a third one. And I wanted to tell history, but I wasn't even rereading my papers. No, that's not true. I was rereading them, but they weren't going to get the traction that I thought I could get working in documentary. And I thought, hey, maybe I can do historical documentaries. Maybe I could work for Ken Burns, haha. And then things just sort of fell into place with an internship, turned into a full-time job, and I've been here ever since I graduated college.
I should say that if Ken were here to answer that question, he grew up dreaming of being a feature filmmaker. And I do think that visual history is very important to how we tell our stories. So there is a real filmmaking piece to it, but there's also, as David is saying, a kind of history culture piece to everything we do.
Absolutely. You're both speaking my type of language, American studies, public history, the visual arts, all combined.
Right.
And I use all of these same films in my classroom. Students respond very, very well to them. And as I look back on my own experiences, I think of this sort of trifecta in the late 1980s, early 1990s, because there was the movie Glory, and then the Civil War came out, and then Gettysburg came out.
Right.
And they all fed off of each other. And there's this sort of zeitgeist about the American Civil War. And
as
that's
a
what brought
cameo
me and so many others into that time period.
Yes. And I was in college exactly at that time. I went to college in 1990 and graduated in 1994. And it was a big, there was sort of a sea change in historical documentary filmmaking at the time. And sort of feature reinterpretations of history. And Ken was at the center of a lot of that.
And I definitely watched Glory when I was a little too young. I don't remember if it's R-rated or not, but if it was, it's the first R-rated movie I watched.
Yeah, it is. I caught the watered down version of it on TBS for Black History Month when I was 9 years old. So
I mean, it's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing that all these years later we got to work with Morgan Freeman. I mean, pretty cool.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, on that point, let's dive into the American Revolution a little bit more. I am a longtime devotee of your films and those of Ken Burns, and I consider myself somewhat of a connoisseur of these documentaries. But I must say, from an aesthetic point of view, I feel that this one makes a big leap. For lack of a better phrase, it feels very cinematic. In the sense that you use reenactors, there are scenes that are recreated, and that's a whole other level of work and research and logistics that go into the making of a film. So I'm interested in that production standpoint. How did you find these authentically clad reenactors? How did you manage all of that? And what was the artistic decision to do so?
We'll both want to speak to this. I'll say three just big 30,000-foot things, and we can get a little into the nitty gritty for all the film nerds out there. Ken has said this a lot in talking about the film. We kind of flipped the way we put our films together upside down so that the live cinematography became at the centerpiece like photography, and the paintings and the maps became the moving imagery. We just turned it around, and we spent the better part of 6 years filming live cinematography across the 13 colonies to capture not just the breadth and majesty and diversity of the North American continent, but the extremes of the weather, which were so central to what made the American Revolutionary War so complicated and what makes this vast land we live on hard to figure out and understand and predict, particularly in the 18th century. But in order to do that, Ken hasn't used reenactments much in any of the films he's made. A little bit in Lewis and Clark, a little bit in Thomas Jefferson. David can speak to the film that he made with Ken on Benjamin Franklin's World. We are used to creating tableaus and filming some, interior historic buildings, historic places. That is central to every film we've made. But this was, we sort of approached it like a feature film. We decided you wouldn't see the reenactors' faces, but you would get a sense of them, that we would film through old glass, that we would have smoke machines to create mist and to obscure, that we would film at very interesting times of day, not just magic hour, that we would do day for night, that we would move through space and use drones in ways we had never used drones before, and that we would be unafraid of the weather and unafraid of kind of risking what we normally do and doing it differently.
It's interesting, Jared, that you said that it looked like we had that we recreated certain scenes, because that's really something that we didn't do, but maybe that means we did the job right. What we kind of did was just film at all of these important historic places, beautiful places places that evoke the 18th century or at least evoke the beauty of this part of North America. But we also worked with reenactors, a lot of whom I'm sure caught the history bug around the same time you did, who are so committed to their craft. And we just filmed them in, battlefield reenactments sometimes. Sometimes we worked with them over a weekend so that we could get them at nighttime. We could talk to them about drilling or what have you to just do some authentic movements that we weren't able to catch in a more verite moment on a battlefield during a reenactment. In their camp life, not just soldiers, but craftspeople, camp followers. When we were working on Franklin, it was really important to understand what it actually took a human to do to print, with a big machine. It's something you have to work with your mind, and it's something you have to work with your body. But we realized that seeing the printing press in operation let you feel, not just think that that's Benjamin Franklin doing that work, but understand what it took to do that work. And so we kind of used that idea again in this film, which we could see people marching. You can realize how much it took to march an army from New York to Virginia to win the Battle of Yorktown, or to see somebody at a blacksmith shop, like to understand that the war effort was really done by hand, kind of required us to film all these places. But what we did was we accumulated lots and lots and lots of footage, and then with our editors worked to see where it would fit, rather than saying, oh, we've got to shoot for this Battle of Monmouth scene. Let's make sure that we've got this point covered, this point covered, this point covered. Once we had the material, it kind of felt more familiar to us in the edit room to what we would have done when we were taking all the footage that we had from archival sources for the Vietnam War, for instance.
Yeah, we usually do a fair amount of generic footage and photographic research. So it's the life of a soldier, a place, not a specific moment or topic. So you want the viewer to experience, soldiers sitting around a campfire. They would do that in almost every situation. So where we were going to use said scene wasn't always prescribed. And I do have to give just a huge shout out to Megan Ruff, our producer, who spent the better part of those 5 or 6 years with Buddy Squires, our main cinematographer, just toughing it out everywhere they could and entrusting the people who spend their lives thinking about these subjects and taking them very seriously. They're just like the historical advisors to the content of the film. We had advisors to the visual language of the film, and we owe them a great debt of gratitude, as David is saying. And I think it was such a fun and different creative challenge for all of us, and everyone had a really good time, as exhausted as they were.
Yeah, Buddy Squire's body of work is a national treasure in and of itself, and I'm really
100%.
looking forward to seeing some of that on the screen.
It's really, he outdid himself, and he would dress up as a soldier and in bed with them so that you could get a different sense of movement, and he got to know them, and he's amazing.
That's fantastic. Well, I suspect that there are going to be many revealing as well as emotional moments shared in this story. When one looks back on the Civil War, one that stands out in the minds of a lot of people is the Sullivan-Ballou letter, which delivers this emotional punch at the end of the first episode. Do you think, this is a very subjective question, is there a moment in this film that you think that will resonate as much as what the words of Sullivan-Ballou did 35 years ago?
I think it's hard to rival Sullivan-Ballou. He's an incredible writer, and it's an incredible moment. And I'm sorry he lost his life right afterwards. It makes up for a great story, though. There's letters that we have in the film written by people who say to their dad, if you get this letter, I'm dead. That's a pretty emotional moment. But I don't think it holds a candle to Sullivan-Ballou. And there's other moments that I think what this film has is that there's a lot of different moments that different people will glom onto. I can't tell you what moment you're gonna really be attached to. And it's a different one for me when I watch it, but different people are gonna come away with different things. I think one moment we've been seeing on the road is that's getting a lot of reaction is when Abigail Adams writes to her husband John and says, when you're making this government, remember the ladies. Now that's a phrase we're all familiar with. What we're not familiar with, or at least I wasn't familiar with, is what she says afterwards, which is, among other things, if you don't listen to us, we're going to foment a rebellion of our own. We won't be held to account in a system where we don't have a voice or representation. And I think that that's amazing, not surprising, but amazing that somebody was saying that in 1776. It's definitely resonating with an audience today.
I will agree that I don't want to, as you say in your question, it's so subjective, what will move people, and Sullivan Ballou is just a great scene in American filmmaking. I mean, it's just an amazing moment, right? It's the letter, it's the photograph, it's what happens to him, it's the Shokin farewell, it's the whole thing, right? I think in this film, there are 4 or 5 moments or scenes that hopefully will unite the country in a way that the Sullivan Ballou letter did, because they are just hugely emotional moments for the birth of the country. So as David is suggesting, the correspondence between Abigail and John is amazing. And that's an incredible gift to American history that we have that. I would say that I think the back half of the second episode, which is when we declare independence, and what did that mean and what did it set in motion, and the discussion around the Declaration of Independence and what happens to the world when that document is set in motion. The last 250 years is fairly emotional, and I think audiences will feel that at the end of the second episode. There's also a scene in our 5th episode where there's an eclipse in 1778, and it's a beautiful scene of how we can unite around a natural event. They don't happen very often. One happened while we were making the film. We got to film it. We got to link back to 1778. It's very beautiful. It's very moving. And then I think some of the moments where a family is split apart, the revolution was really a civil war amongst families in ways that our Civil War was a sectional war. Didn't really divide as in kind of classic Civil War way that the American Revolution did. And so Henry Knox and his pregnant wife, Lucy, she loses her family to the Loyalist cause. There's an amazing scene at the Battle of Bennington where 2 people are fighting with their friends and their family and killing each other for a cause. And that's very devastating and very emotional. And then there are the beautiful letters home that soldiers are writing to their parents and to their loved ones, and they don't necessarily make it. So I'll be very curious what the 2 or 3 Sullivan Ballou scenes as they bubble up to the surface once we hand the film over to all of you.
What I think is just Sullivan Ballou is a name that we know because he wrote that one letter. He's not Abraham Lincoln. He's not Robert E. Lee. He's not one of those bold-faced names. I think there are going to be a lot of people like that come to the surface through this film that we didn't know before, who could really write. And we're really grateful that they knew they were living through history and wanted to put that history on paper.
That's wonderful. I'm so looking forward to it. You've made me even more excited for the program now. As we think about these hallmark moments in television, I think it's also worthwhile to reflect on just how drastically television has changed in our lifetimes, the last 20 years specifically. And I think back to these sort of communal and shared events of the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, when you consider something like Roots or Holocaust or the Civil War, these mini-series or documentaries where 30, 40, or 50 million people tuned in. It's a lot more difficult today to attain an audience like that because everything is siloed. There are so many options. And one could say, or maybe you could attest to this, it might even be harder for something like public television to break through all that noise. So my question to you is, how are you trying to reach the broadest possible audience with the American Revolution, given some of those challenges?
Well, first of all, we're spending the better part of a year traveling around the country, going to as many communities and markets as we can, connecting with local populations, local schools, local libraries, local public television stations. PBS is very unique in our country. It has 240 stations all in every state. And so in addition to the film, we create very robust and extensive educational material so that the film lives on in the classroom. And we work with libraries, teachers, educational institutions, to have the film be bigger than just a broadcast. Public television also is free and available to everybody. So we try to make sure that everyone knows it's on so that people can come together to learn about our shared past, our origin story, our birthday, which is coming up. And I think it's incumbent upon us to do everything we can to make sure everyone knows it's on. And we were at a conference recently where they made pencils that said something like Ken Burns, binge-worthy television. He loves, he invented these multi-episodic series. He didn't invent them, but he's so well known for it, and people love to binge our stuff. And it'll be, free and streaming to everyone in the country on November 16th. And we hope everyone will at least watch some of it.
I think people are hungry for this information. I think people realize that they know something about the American Revolution. Of course, it's really important to our memory. It's important to our identity as Americans. But I don't think, and certainly, at least I'm speaking for myself, I don't think people, and I definitely me, did not understand how the parts fit in together, understood the context of why people did what they did, understood why they were at Trenton or Yorktown or Lexington and Concord, and also how much it has meant to all of the generations of Americans who have come since. So I think our job at this point, now that we've just about finished the film, is to make sure people watch it. And we are really, really grateful, Jared, that you're helping us do that.
I'm really honored to be part of this conversation with you this afternoon. When we think, though, about legacy, let's say, and Ken Burns has shared this story on a number of occasions publicly. Without the success of the Civil War, the movie Gettysburg doesn't happen. I mean, he had a conversation with Ted Turner, and Ted Turner asked him, like, oh, should I adapt The Killer Angels into a miniseries? And Ken Burns said yes, and the rest is history. I'm hopeful that the success of this film might spur some Hollywood revisiting of the American Revolution. So my question to you is, what is the greatest movie about the American Revolution waiting to be made?
Ooh, David, I'm tossing this to you.
The best book by somebody who lived through the American Revolution is Joseph Plum Martin's memoirs. An incredible writer, hilarious, and he was there for all sorts of famous and not so famous parts of the revolution. So I think his story, he's 15 when he enlists in the Connecticut militia. He serves in the worst defeat of the revolution for the Americans at the Battle of Long Island, the biggest battle of the war. Maybe not the worst defeat, because that's probably the surrender at Charleston or something in Canada, but the biggest battle, Washington's worst defeat. He's there for that. And he continues to serve through the war. So he's at Germantown, he's at Brandywine, he's at a little-known battle called Fort Mifflin that sounds absolutely awful. And he's at Yorktown for the surrender. And he's a great, great writer. So I would say his story is ripe for Hollywood production. It should be a miniseries, though, not just a movie.
Yeah, no, that's a great, great answer. And I was first introduced to Joseph Plum Martin, believe it or not, at age 9.
Good for you.
Because he was one of the voices in the A&E production, The American Revolution. It came out about 1994 or so. And Rick Schroeder did the voice
Nice.
of him. And so he's long been a staple of my understanding of the American Revolution. I'm glad to see he's resurfacing in your film as well.
The great actor Alden Ehrenreich reads Joseph Plum Martin in our film, and he does a beautiful job.
He's really good at it.
Perfect. Han Solo. There you go.
Exactly.
All right. As I look back on the catalog of Florentine films, I noticed that there are a lot of what you could call companion pieces. One could make the argument that Jackie Robinson is a companion piece of baseball. Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, you could say, are companion pieces to your forthcoming film on the American Revolution, and so on and so forth. Would the team be interested in revisiting the likes of the Civil War and looking at something more in depth like Gettysburg, for instance, in a future project?
I don't know about that. By the way, I just have a curiosity. Did you ever play the video game Sid Meier's Gettysburg?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. That also drove me into this. I think probably that there's, the next film that Ken's doing that's relating to the Civil War is It's called, I think it's going to be called Emancipation to Exodus, and it's begins pre-Civil War with people emancipating themselves, but includes certainly the Emancipation Proclamation and leads through the legacy of the Civil War into Reconstruction and later on Great Migration when a lot of Black Americans left the South. So I think that's the first way that he's going to go back into the Civil War. But give enough time, maybe we could get to it.
Yeah, it seems like a very natural sequel to the Civil War, Emancipation to Exodus. I'm really looking forward to that one. Sounds very timely.
Yeah.
Also, looking back on a lot of these films, uh, you and your team members have had some phenomenal opportunities to work with some incredible actors. You've mentioned a few of them already. I love that Paul Giamatti and Laura Linney are reprising their roles.
So Laura Linney is being a different role.
Yes, Claire Danes plays Abigail Adams, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Okay.
Laura Linney is an amazing voice in the series. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
We didn't want to do both, but
Sure,
Paul was
sure.
our John. Yeah.
That's the danger of me making assumptions and looking at the cast list. But all that said, who have been some of your favorite actors to work with? Is there one been particularly joyful
We're
to
going
work
to leave
in these
people
films?
off if we get too much into this, but I will say the most nervous I was with Matthew Rhys. And that's because I wanted to be his friend because he was so cool and so funny and so fun to work with. He is the voice of Thomas Paine in the series, and he is incredible. He could do any voice. I mean, he's in The Americans. He's Welsh in The Americans. He plays a Russian American hiding his accents back and forth. So he could do anything, and he just completely knocked it out of the park for us as Thomas Paine in a voice that we tried to find a way to be clearly English, but not, but still feel a little American, as this is a transatlantic character. So he pronounces his R's. Anyway, he's great.
Yeah, and I would say I think Sir Kenneth Branagh is pretty unmatched, and he read for us British voices, American voices, French voices, German voices. He can really do anything, and is just up on a pedestal. But I think the same is true for Claire Danes and Laura Linney and Amanda Gorman, who reads beautifully in the film. Josh Brolin. They were all. It was really an embarrassment of riches and just a complete privilege to work with all of them. And we're really excited for everybody to hear and guess who's who.
Some of the big characters that are not big names. So Joseph Plum Martin, you've heard of, most people haven't, Alden Ehrenreich. John Greenwood is another character voiced by Joe Keery, and another Stranger Things alum, although they're not quite alums yet. Maya Hawke reads this character Betsy Ambler, who's in all but one of our episodes and a really important character.
What a phenomenal list of talent that you've had the opportunity to work with. When we look back on how the American Revolution has been commemorated, I think of the bicentennial in 1976. And as we look at that as a historical commemoration, I think one could very much make the argument that it offered an emotional rebound after Watergate and the Vietnam War. Our country has gone through some similarly difficult times in more recent years. And the bicentennial had somewhat of a mixed success. It was in part inclusive, but also exclusive, especially in the stories that it reflected upon. And you've already alluded to this somewhat, but how would you like your film to contribute to a sense of national identity, unity, and healing?
I think that the most important thing we can offer is a resource for people. So I hope that they watch it, and I hope that they see something that interests them more to dig in further. I hope that it's used when you're visiting Germantown, for instance. I hope that the scene from Germantown features there. I think it's a good scene. I think it will bring people in, but I hope it brings people to those places, right? So if you watch it at home, you're going to want to go visit cow pens in South Carolina. I hope that people recognize that history is everybody's history. And if that's unifying, wonderful. But I think that it's not quite fair to the bicentennial to say it's. I guess what I would say is a lot of the books that we used to make this film were published in 1976, right? So there was a lot of interest around this, and a lot of people were trying to do what we're trying to do. And whether they succeeded or not, I guess isn't for me to say, but this is our generation's chance to tell the story of the American Revolution in our own time. And 1976 was a rough time. 1876 was a really rough time. So 2026, this is our chance.
The only thing I'll add is that I think our country was divided and debated when we were founded. 100 years later, in 1976, I had this sort of romantic notion that we were more united in 1976. We were not. It was at the fall of Saigon, Watergate, very complicated time. The film has many generations of historians and many generations of historical figures. So I think I would say I'm hoping that many generations can think about our history. History is a conversation. We're giving you the stories to think about, to connect to find some resonance with, and to maybe take some inspiration for us to go back to the questions of why we were founded, how we were founded, the debates that the founders had around what a people's republic could be, what a democracy could look like, and try to connect the threads, both to celebrate how we are different and how we are united, and what it means to be patriotic, and to celebrate this experiment in a people's republic and a democracy. It's sort of all those things.
That theme is a really good segue for a final question for you both. And that involves the value of PBS. PBS and public media have been under siege a lot lately. I welcome you to share your thoughts on the value of PBS and all of its local stations. It's hundreds of local stations across the country.
I would say I think PBS is an extremely valuable asset to communities large and small across this vast country, red state and blue state. It's the only place I've ever made films. I'm very grateful to it. I'm grateful for its connection to community. I'm grateful for its engagement to all kinds of communities and all kinds of people, and that it's free to the public. So I think public television is extremely important.
It belongs to everybody. That's not the case with basically anything else you can get. I think it's kind of like the national parks, the service for us. It's been really
underscores the very notion of democracy that we've been talking about. So thank you so much for joining me in the conversation this afternoon. I learned a lot. It's heightened my anticipation for the series even further. I'm sure it will for my viewers as well. So thank you to you both for your efforts, your expertise, and your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, for your attention. Bye.
That wraps up everything for this episode of Real History. We appreciate you tuning in, and of course, we'll see you next time. And until then, my friends, stay curious.